Part 1. New Purgatory. Chapter 1. The old man was leaned back on a wall as he pulled out his cigar and lit it. His dusted coat did little in the purgatory night, but the chill didn't seem to bother him. He let smoke fill his lungs deeply, then exhaled. He eyed the streets. This district of New Purgatory never saw much action, aside from the occasional APC or Jeep racing through. The rich stayed hid up in their skyscrapers near Old Times Square, waited on hand and foot by servants. Meanwhile, folks less fortunate attempted to carve out a living in the ruined buildings that surrounded the inner city. Jack figured himself lucky. Jack had been given access to land and an opportunity to rebuild. His cigar burned as he took another deep drag. Jack grabbed the rusty shotgun that rested against the wall and began walking down the sidewalk. He had heard the explosions from afar while he was trying to enjoy his evening with the drink. While the district he'd lived in was decently populated, Jack didn't want to take any chances. There were rumors of Morrison's death squads roaming about. Each of Jack's steps didn't make a sound, no boots clacking on the pavement, just the silence of the night wind. He stopped and took a knee and placed his shotgun on the ground. His cigar had gone out. The old man pulled a metal flick lighter out from his duster and rekindled the flame. The familiar cold of metal pressed against the back of his head. "Leave it on the ground," the English-accented woman said. "Of course," Jack said, standing up and turning around to look at the blonde with the pistol pointed at him. "Maybe I can help you out. You don't look like you're from around here." "Who are you?" she asked. "You don't look like a Marine." "Not anymore, miss." Jack could see that her eyes were intense but reasonable. "I was, but that was a long time ago." "What's an ex-Marine doing in the entertainment district?" "Making sure it's safe for the few people who live around here and call it home, be it from Marines or rebels." Jack took a drag off his cigar and exhaled it in front of her. She lowered her pistol and motioned for him to take his shotgun. "Do you have a shelter nearby?" she asked. Jack laughed as he started walking, motioning for her to follow. "More in a shelter if you want to see for yourself." The two followed the road for a time until they reached an alleyway. Jack went through first and pushed a button to open a service entrance of what Layla thought was an old warehouse. "This giant building is your home. I didn't know Marines made that much," she said. "You'd be surprised at things the world did before the war to attract soldiers or keep them out of retirement. The old government called them commissions. Morrison prefers to call them bounties," Jack explained. "You made a killing, then?" Layla deadpanned. Jack shook his head as he motioned for her to go through the door. A loud thumping bass pounded in her chest and rang in her ears. She turned back to Jack, who now was laughing. "What the hell is that?" she asked. "Music. Morrison was once kind to those who gave the most of themselves for what was left of their country," Jack explained. "Now he slaughters folks in the streets. World changed in a hurry. World changed him just as quick." Jack guided her over to the stairs, which led down to the main part of the club. "That room there," Jack pointed to another door on the second level. "It's set up for usage of a small group, but there are bedrooms and showers up there. Used to use it for small events, but now it's mostly empty save the furnishings." "What kind of events?" Layla asked as they made their way downstairs and across the main floor of the club. "Well, I call them events, but there isn't much call for formal weddings and dinner parties these days, at least not down here. It was a planning room that I only used once. I loan it out to scab teams from time to time to plot out missions in the outer reaches." "Why'd you build it if you were only going to use it once?" Layla questioned. "You're a curious one, aren't you?" Jack asked. "What I wanted it for doesn't much matter anymore. Some dreams are just that. Dreams." Jack waved over to one of the bartenders at the center circular bar in the club, and then made his way over to a sound-controlled booth with Layla right behind him. The bartender brought over several different drinks on a tray for Layla and whiskey on the rocks for Jack. "Pick your poison," Jack said. Layla grabbed the first short glass of brown liquid she saw and downed it. "Did you even taste it?" the old man asked. "Right, sure. It was tequila. One's enough. So who are you? Why did you bring me here to show me this?" Layla spun in the booth, taking in the neon lights, the dancers on the floor, the smoke rising from various other booths. "Call me Jack. Jack Newsome," he replied. "Layla Lansfield." "A pleasure, Layla. Those explosions, you wouldn't happen to know anything about them, would you?" Layla's blue eyes grew slightly and then narrowed. "If you wanted to collect a bounty, you should have done it on the street." There are far too many people in here for you to hit me with that shotgun of yours. Jack let out a laugh before going back to sipping his drink. You, my friend, have been living in the wastes far too long. Not unlike some other folk I know. You, my friend, have been living in the wastes far too long. Not unlike some other folk I know. Seeing enemies everywhere, and in anything. His tone shifted, more somber. That's not the way things are supposed to be. Not the way they have to be. Layla watched as the man's gaze shifted from her to the bottom of his glass of scotch. She had seen that look on Alex before. It meant regret, or shame. I asked because I already knew your name, Layla, and I know your band. Crusaders, you call yourselves. Didn't make the name official until tonight. Layla shook her head. How do you know that? Jack smiled and looked up. I know a lot. I've got resources, but they're starting to burn. You, that Alex of yours, you have a chance. A chance of what? Revolution. What? Alex shouted. I don't know. I got blasted, and when I woke up, she was gone, Elias said as he hung his head. Fuck, Alex said under his breath. She could still be alive. That's better than my brother here, Tyler said in a daze. He'd been staring at his brother's body covered by a sheet for the better part of an hour. So what the hell do we do then? Elias asked. She could be anywhere in the ruins. Alex looked hurt but forced himself to answer. We've got to keep on with the plan. We got to keep trying to hurt Morrison. We recruit more, we get revenge for what he's done. I doubt there's many willing fighters lost under the skyscrapers. We can't get into a scrap with them without losing someone. Others can't be faring any better, Elias replied. Criminals, mercs, and thieves don't lose ambition just because the world is a war zone. Times like these only make their jobs more lucrative, Alex countered. Mercenaries for hire? Fuck that. Most of them are just as bad as Morrison. They'd sooner kill us and take a paycheck from him, Tyler complained. Ty, you just lost your brother, and I just lost Layla. Now I know we aren't the only sons of bitches out there looking to settle the score with Morrison. Those are the people we need to find. Those are the people that will help us hit back, Alex stated. Elias moved to his mattress, pistol in hand. He admired the simplicity of the handgun, its eerie dark silver color. How smooth it felt when he pulled the trigger, and its deadly accuracy. It had been the same gun he'd found as a younger man, and the same gun that helped keep him alive all these years. Well, good luck with that. At the end of the day, the man with the most soldiers and weapons wins. In this case, it happens to be the man with the most money, too, Tyler quipped as he stole a sip from his flask. Numbers and munitions aren't the answer to everything, Elias replied. Yeah, well tell that to my fucking brother, Tyler shot back. For fuck's sake, would you two give it a rest? Alex yelled. We just lost 3 of our friends, and I'm not about to lose you two to each other. It's been a sad day for all of us. Get your shit together, or this fight of ours isn't gonna last the next time we step out the fucking door. The 3 sat quiet in their ruined camp for a time. None of them looking at each other, all disappointed, embarrassed, or lost in loss. The sound of footsteps broke their silence. Each man reacted by drawing their weapons and aiming at the door. The footsteps continued until an older, weathered man passed through the blasted opening that was their front door. Hey, get out of here, Tyler yelled, rushing at him, but the man sidestepped and watched the tall attacker trip over his own feet. You call this a home? He started, looking down at Tyler as if he was a child, learning to walk. This isn't a home. This is what you've been gifted by Morrison, like so many others. Oh, what do you know about it? Tyler asked, forcing himself up off the concrete. You're not some tower fucker. You look like trash, just less. Trash with similar goals, maybe. With more experience than the 3 of you put together. You've had some weapon training, I'll give you that. But that's not uncommon out in these wastes. You'll need more than that if you plan on taking on John Morrison. How do you know about that? Alex asked. I have my resources, but mostly I pay attention. Did you know these attacks you've been staging have made international news? If you were trying to make a point, it got across. The question is, if you're willing to run with that, or be next week's footnote, local gang wiped out in the wastes, the old man explained. He walked throughout the room, staring at the flattened mattresses. A bloody blanket lay over Van. The old man ignored it and sat at the edge. That belongs to a friend of ours, Tyler said, crossing his arms from across the room. Which one? Your brother riddled with bullets? The old man said, jutting up a thumb behind him. Or the psychopath that blew herself to Kingdom Come? or the blonde you left behind. His stare was fixed on Eli. Elias moved over to the bed and hauled the old man up by the collar of his combat jacket and hoisted him to his feet. Were you there? Did you watch us get slaughtered? Elias yelled with a fury out of character from his normal, calm demeanor. Alex ran over and pulled his friend off the man. Elias stepped backwards, realizing what he had done, and took a knee, attempting to catch his breath. Alex rested a hand on his friend's shoulder, then looked back at the old man. Did you come here just to taunt us? Alex asked. I wanted to see the Crusaders with my own eyes. Took me a bit to find your hiding spot. Suppose I'll have to thank our mutual friend for that. I like what I've seen, just need to sharpen some edges. The old man sat back down at the edge of the mattress and reached inside his jacket for a flask. You're at the start of a specific plan. A plan that this city hasn't seen in around 10 years. But I know none of you can execute it alone. That's why I've been watching. Seeing what your next moves are. That's why I'm having this conversation with you right now, rather than waiting for you to get killed out there in the wastes. My name is Jack Newsom. Retired Marine from Morrison's Corps and the United States military before that. As the tension cooled in the room, Alex found a broken glass and filled it from a pipe that still bled water and passed it to Newsom. How long did you serve? Alex asked as Jack sipped on the water. Too long. Longer still when Morrison took over. You fought overseas then? Tyler said as he gingerly swigged from a family flask filled to the top with scotch. I sweat my ass off for a few years in the sand, yeah. After we bagged some bastard you'd have never heard of in a place you couldn't pronounce, Uncle Sam decided to call it, at least as far as full-scale invasions went. Oil pricing played a big part of all that. Elias was growing tired of the history lesson. So what is it you hope to accomplish by coming here? He asked. I came to invite you to my home, a little place off the edge of the entertainment district where we can talk more without fear of being shelled. Ever been to Alonso's? Heard of it, but never been there, Elias responded. Jack set the water glass by his feet and stood up, making way for the exit. Find the time to make it over there, then find me. Drinks are on the house. I have an offer for you boys and a welcome surprise. With that, Jack disappeared behind the blast in the wall and left the three men behind. Elias shook his head. Old bastard left as quickly as he showed up. I'm just going to go ahead and call bullshit now, Tyler said, sitting down to relax on the floor. Only Morrison has enough pull in the city to find us here. The man's an ex-Marine, Ty. You don't think he knows how to do a bit of tracking? Alex replied, slinging his rifle over his back. Either that, or he got to somebody who knows where we are. Do you think... Elias trailed. Alex shook his head. Only one way to find out. You're not seriously considering his offer? Tyler asked. What have we got to lose? Alex countered as he glanced over at Elias. Are you coming? Elias set his pistol in the holster and gave his friend a nod. And what the hell am I supposed to do? Tyler asked. Sober up, Elias said. Then leave the corpse behind and come find us. Tyler shook his head. Alex threw on his ripped combat jacket and made for the door, followed closely by Elias. Alex was sure that as far as John Morrison knew, Alexander Velasco and Elias Lehner were casualties of Operation Blood Boil. This trend had served them well in the past, as Operation Blood Boil's compiled list of citizens were all considered deceased. Anonymity was a weapon in this world where all it took was the slip of the tongue to have soldiers busting in your door and killing you and anyone you were close to. When the pair could see the vibrant lights at the edge of the entertainment district, they knew they were close. The neon glow, while beautiful, gave off a false sense of security. Morrison still had power in the lower reaches. It was just downplayed. They came in through a back entrance where they found a set of stairs and then a main door leading towards the thumping base. As they entered, the pounding of their chests doubled. Alex and Elias made their way towards the bar. The two pushed their way through the crowd. They shed their jackets to embrace the natural warmth created by all the bodies moving on the dance floor. They both took a seat at the bar. Neither of them had ever been to Alonso's before. They both thought it to be too dangerous with all the Marine patrols, but neither man could find any presence of Morrison's soldiers. The club, vibrant in its colors around the dance floor, was more muted around the bar. There were different colored lights behind the bottles of liquid that rested on the shelves, but it was decidedly darker in this area and around the booze. There were laser lights in greens, purples, and blues shooting onto the dance floor and into the air. Electronic beats and tribal drums pierced every patron's ear and stomach, the bass rending the minds of the few into a drug-infused euphoria of technology, sexuality, and freedom, even if the next morning brought to light the lie. The two continued working their eyes around the various dancers, musicians, and patrons when they happened to spot Newsom in a private booth where only dim lights penetrated. The two moved from the bar and headed to the booth as Jack waved them over. When they took their seats, Elias marveled at the controls embedded into the table. There were settings for lights from bright and dim to their very color. A complete drink list via an electronic readout, even a temperature controller. It was different from New Purgatory's wastes. "Glad you boys decided to show up. What do you think?" Jack asked. "Not what I'm used to," Alex said, looking back at the bar. "A little too public, even if we are on the edge of the district," Elias finished. "Knock off the worrying. This place is far more secure than that blast in the wall you call home. But we'll get to that later. You boys can speak freely here, eat here, stay here. It's all taken care of," Jack said. When the old man looked up from his drink, he couldn't help but have a chuckle at the stunned look on the boys' faces. "Thirsty?" he asked. Alex and Elias nodded. "Well, you both walked long enough to earn a drink. Why don't you two walk a little further down to that bar over there and drop my name?" "You kidding? You got a kiosk for ordering sitting right here," Elias said. "Not the point, kid. Oh, give me another whiskey while you're at it. Drop my name." Elias shot a look at Alex, clearly displeased. He knew if anyone wouldn't put up with this kind of treatment, it was him. Alex looked back, but didn't show much emotion. Instead, he tilted his head towards the bar and got up from his chair. As they moved back through the crowded dance floor, Elias spoke through his comm. "Are we really putting up with this shit? He's probably another crazy refugee with a fake war story. Even if it isn't bullshit, he's probably half-cracked anyway." "He's eccentric, I'll give him that. But I still want to hear him out," Alex replied, using his jacket to cover his mouth. "Even if it means getting us butchered or ambushed by Maury?" Elias asked. Alex ignored him and approached the bar. He waved down the bartender who was garnishing a few drinks. She gave him a nod and mouthed, "1 minute." Alex put an elbow at the bar and looked at Elias, who was shifting around, trying to avoid contact with the other patrons. "Loosen up a little. You think there are soldiers waiting around here?" Alex asked. "After Yankee, I expect them to be everywhere. I fucking hate this city, man," Elias spat. "Come on, seems like your kind of place. You're always talking about the entertainment district, the music, the drugs," Alex said. "What do you think of it?" Elias looked around for a bit. The two always talked about the bright lights of the inner city when they were younger. It was only when they were older that they realized how much blood had bought the pretty scenery, expensive drinks, and crazy nightlife. Not a bad place to bleed out. Dance floor doesn't have much cover unless you count the bodies, Elias finally said. Alex smiled and shook his head. Now he knew his old friend was trying to annoy him. "What can I get you to?" the bartender asked, getting Alex's attention. "What's the owner's preference?" he asked, leaning over the bar. "The top dollar whiskey with ice," she replied. Elias moved beside his friend. "3 of those, with no ice." Alex turned his back on the bar and rested his back against it. Elias watched as the girl turned around and began looking through the vast assortment of bottles. "If he's good for it, he won't mind. If he's lying, we'll get a reaction," Elias stated, still hunched over the bar. "Yeah," Alex replied as the girl turned and placed 3 filled glasses before them. 80 credit units, please," she said. "Put it on Jack Newsom's tab," Alex said, spinning around and grabbing his glass. Her expression changed for a moment. Not of distress, however, which Alex took as a good sign. "Oh yes, of course. Old Jack mentioned he was having guests, though normally he just orders through the kiosk. Either way, you're all set." "Appreciate it," Elias said, flipping her a 20 credit chit. "There's your answer," he continued, over the comm. "Not bad either. Like rubbing alcohol mixed with water," Alex replied. "Well?" Jack said with a light chuckle. Alex slid the old man's glass across the table and took a seat, then said, "So you have a stake in a bar. You didn't have us come all the way down here to get you a drink, Mr. Newsom." "Captain," Jack responded, dipping a finger into his glass. "Some of the greatest battle plans were incepted from the bottom of a glass, but I digress. It served its purpose, by satisfying your curiosities and hopefully raising new questions. The old man knocked back a splash of his new glass of whiskey. You keep a steady pace with that shit? Elias asked, taking a seat beside his friend. 3 a day to keep the memories at bay, the old man responded. Elias tilted his head, but Jack ignored the younger man's annoyance. All right, I'll get to the point. Alonso's an old pal of mine from the service. I saved his life and his arm. Back in the old world military? Alex asked. No, he's a bit younger than I am. We worked for Morrison before he became a murderous asshole. We both came together in 2020. I ended up making a good sergeant for his troops, I suppose. A captain became a sergeant? Elias asked accusingly. It's not the same structure as the old world, kid. If anything, Morrison organized it even better. Combat vets teaching the new bloods how not to run into gunfire was an effective system. He doesn't have a military background himself, so he let the old generals and commanders translate the work he wants done. It's effective, but utilitarian, Jack responded with an edge in his voice. How does a former private corps Marine come to own a club at the edge of the entertainment district? Alex pressed. I'm getting there, kid, I'm getting there, Jack replied, taking another sip from his glass. Now, before Blood Boil, most of the Marines, including myself, were working out the gang issues here and in the inner and outer city. We'd clear them out by force, stop all the kidnappings and the occasional street rape. It was work that made a difference for a while. Every now and again I'd hear about some civilian casualties, but I never saw it in my unit. We did what we could to help people, saved kids and families. After some time, though, I saw the way Morrison was starting to lean. We started running out of bad guys to kill, and that's when the rumors about the dead zones came up. What rumors? Alex was leaned over the table, now genuinely interested in Jack's story. The ranks were really beginning to fill out. I never saw it, but the rumors were that Morrison was sending detachments out to old military bases in the north and south, former states called Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Vermont. It was all part of some initiative to recruit old soldiers and loot their supplies. You said the ranks were filling out, Elias commented. It worked? Not everywhere. The rumors were of the other bases that didn't surrender or buy into what Morrison was selling. They fought back, and they lost, Jack spat off to the side. I got to know some of the other vets who decided to sign on with Morrison. He used them to find other bases and did the same to them. Sign on or die. After that became known, being a part of his private corps felt like treason. So I left. The old man took another sip before continuing. Severance package included a choice of land anywhere in the city, and because I was a sergeant, I got a little bit larger of a share than the standard foot soldier. So I picked a bulldozed, rubble-laden square out here on the fringe of the entertainment district. Shit, everything you see in here, the lighting, the design, the bar, all a result of my handiwork. Alonso just needed a damn job and I needed anonymity, so I named the fucking place after him. Jack finished as he ended his glass and punched up a few buttons on the kiosk. 3 or more in evening? Elias said rhetorically as the girl from behind the bar approached with 3 more fresh glasses. Jack responded by holding up a glass of clear liquid. Purified water. Far better than that shit you've been drinking from a pipe your whole life. Anyway, I made a few requests from the military to secure some of the furniture they had sitting in the old storage units that were never going to be claimed again. I already knew where to get food and made connections with people all over the city. The ones that survived the war, anyways. Getting chefs, dancers, and musicians was just a matter of showing them how popular this dingy club was. Alex reclined a bit in his chair and clasped his hands together. Do you still have ties with Morrison? He asked. Not anymore. Aside from taxes, he really doesn't care what goes on in this district. No one is stupid enough to attack him a few blocks away from his tower. Jack could see their eyes light up to the possibilities and let a wicked grin slide across his face. Well, no one is stupid enough yet, but this base isn't much without the specialists to fill it. I got a list of some of the best. Most of them are people I worked with one time or another. That's what you're pitching? An attack on Morrison? Alex asked. Well, I was hoping I wouldn't have to spell it out for you. Look, you're never going to get anywhere just attacking his men. That much is clear. He has ways to get more. If we get the help we need, then we have an actual shot at the man himself, Jack explained. Who are these specialists? Elias asked. Soldiers, doctors, convicts, even a few surprises that may turn out to be nothing more than rumors. I'm willing to share all that with you boys, but let's take a step back. It's a matter of a gift I have for you, Alex. Layla Lansfield, She's alive, and she's here. Alex looked at the man sternly. He hadn't seen her the entire time he had been at the club. Where? He asked, setting down his glass hard on the table. Jack took another long sip from his drink before he responded. You don't need to worry about her safety. I just thought you'd like to know she was nearby. You got my guarantees she won't come to harm here. Alex didn't like it, but he knew there was no other alternative other than hearing the old man out. He relaxed the tenseness in his shoulders and breathed in and out slowly, calming himself and reminding himself that it was good that Layla was still alive. All right, so you got a list, and, Alex finally said, and it's going to be our job to bring him into the fold. The old man reached into his jacket and pulled out a list with a few other documents. These 3 are in our immediate area now, and are the only ones that matter as far as I'm concerned. More details will come later as we establish a better set of trust. Alex didn't bother to look down at the list, while Elias studied the names and pored through some of the documents. Janet Trishella, Tommy Gambiani, prisoner 0110. You know these 3? Elias asked. Janet does weapon work. She's a savant of a gunsmith. Her father worked for Morrison for a few years developing weapons. When I left, he followed me and helped reform our old unit until he died. Every rifle a Morrison soldier uses in the field today is a result of Eric Trischella's designs. Jack turned his head in disgust. A few years back, she stormed into the facility where her father had worked. She knew all the weapon testing schedules. After a few weeks of staking the place out, she went in alone and with one of her father's rifles he made especially for her. It was a prototype that Eric made sure never became exposed with the Corps. When I saw the news the next day, 20 Marines were listed as killed in action by an unknown assailant. Our first specialist is a suicidal girl with a father complex, Elias said, flipping the pages to the next person. Please tell me you've got others with varying talents. Your first specialist is the best riflewoman in New Purgatory, who hates John Morrison as much as you do, Jack responded. She's already on her way here, so I'd keep your smart-ass remarks to yourself. She can get irritable, but if there's anything she respects, it's strong leadership. Alex looked visibly drained as he sank into the booth. With the realization that Layla was okay, he felt more relaxed, but he strongly wanted to verify that fact. But not tonight, Jack continued. You both look like you could use a bit of sleep. That bartender will give you a key to the flat upstairs. Try not to get too excited about it. I'll be up in the morning and we can start the recruitment drive. As the last few words passed through the old man's mouth, Alex was already up and out of the booth, with Elias dragging on behind him. It was difficult to not be excited. The flat was a giant room with 6 small sub-rooms on the northern and western sides of the wall. On the eastern and southern side, black-tinted glass overlooked the bright lights of the entertainment district and the destruction of the outer wastes, a reminder of Operation Blood Boil. There was also a clear view of their final objective, the repurposed Empire State Building that served as John Morrison's citadel. The flat was lightly furnished, the centerpiece being a massive redwood carved table surrounded by leather chairs. Along the walls to the rooms, there were weapon and armor lockers fully stocked with ammunition, cleaning supplies, and spare parts. You know, since we started fighting, I really didn't think it would lead to all this, Alex said, plopping down on one of the chairs. It's good to be ahead of expectation, Elias replied, looking through the rooms. Each door had a name stenciled on it, and he read a few to himself as Alex continued to speak. Elias started on the western end. Tommy Gambiani, Talia Shazari. If we were ahead of expectation, we might already be dead, Alex replied. Brandon Dweegu, Janet Trishella, Dylan Johnston. There's no reward without risk. The opposite is also true, Elias stated while moving from the western side of the room towards the north. Mikhail Koslov, Otto, Nayala Hargraven. At least now we can fight on a closer level to Morrison, Alex said. We might not have all his resources, but now we have a real place to sleep, to plan, Alex said. Sure, so long as you don't mind that we're in debt to a man we hardly know, Elias responded. Tyler McGrath, Elias Lehner, Alexander Velasco. Alex, Layla doesn't have a room. Didn't Jack say she was here? Elias asked as he turned. Alex stood up and walked over to his room. He said she was in the building. I'm betting these are our other team members, future recruits, Elias continued. Recognize any names? Alex asked, pushing his door open by leaning slightly on the handle. Hell no, Elias scoffed. Makes you wonder how the hell Newsome does. It makes sense that he wouldn't show his whole hand just yet. That man probably has resources we can't even... Alex trailed as he pushed open the door fully and walked into his room. He was cut off as he looked at the person tucked under the covers of his bed. He saw Layla's short blonde hair and he could smell the fresh soap she must have just used. Gently, he placed one of his hands on hers while she slept and smiled. The tension in his body disappeared. She had dominated his mind after they first met, and it had been like that ever since. She gave him the will to fight back instead of just scraping by every day. Alex looked over at Elias with renewed purpose. No matter what it takes, or who these people are, we can do this. I'm going to go poke around my room for a bit. Newsome stocked it with books. I'll catch you in the morning, Elias said, closing the door behind him. Alex lay back on the bed next to Layla, still holding her hand, then drifted off to sleep. Layla woke up, what must have been around 2 or 3 in the morning, to the familiar smell of spring soap in one hand enclosed around her own. They were spooned together, but she was able to turn enough to see her love, deeply and happily asleep with her in his arms. She pulled his hand to her face and kissed it. It was strange, she thought. All the years she had been alone, she felt safe, but after crossing paths with Alex, she couldn't imagine what it would be like getting along on her own. She laid her head back down on the pillow and let her eyes close, then thought about the first time they met. 2030. John Morrison had just ended Operation Blood Boil, and everyone Layla Lansfield had ever known in New Purgatory was dead. A lone blonde, blue-eyed girl from the United Kingdom, with only an SMG and her wits, was left to fend for herself in the outer wastes of what had once been New York City. Her heritage was across the Atlantic, but she had grown up in New Purgatory. As a child, she had been selected as one of 3 students from her school to visit New York City and do a meet and greet with local politicians. She had trouble remembering the night the bombs fell, being so young, but she did remember sitting in front of a large monitor and watching a live feed of London until the explosion violently ended the broadcast. She couldn't remember if the reporters were on location or reporting from a faraway place. It didn't matter. They were all dead now. The only sound she could hear was her own crying, begging to see her mother and father one last time. She could remember clenching a locket with their faces on it. Her mother had given it to her before seeing her off on her flight. When I married your father, he gave me this. He told me no matter what happens, I'll always be close to your heart. You're going all the way across the ocean, Princess. Now I want you to have it. If you feel lonely and the sky seems to darken, just look to your heart and we'll be there, right there, with you. 13 years after that moment, she still looked to her locket for the safety of her parents. Layla had tried her best to spend as much time in shelters and displaced foreigner centers as possible instead of sleeping in the ruins, but some nights she had no choice. Though the ruins were an unsafe place for such a young girl, Layla never ran into the trouble some of the other girls from the shelters had. As she got older and bolder, she began making money from scavenging ruins. At around 15, she was leading a team of explorers, thrill-seekers, and fortune finders into New Purgatory's deadliest ruins. Until Operation Blood Boil. When Morrison's father was murdered by rioters from the poor and infirm of New Purgatory citizens, her world was flung into chaos. She had woken up in what was once Gravesend to gunfire and explosions both inside and outside of her building. Layla kept one rule in situations like these: survival, at all costs. Flinging her body from her bed, she grabbed a black pack from under the mattress and her SMG from a nearby bed table. She checked its ammo, then started making for the door. As she approached, she could hear the marching of boots right outside and pressed her back to the wall. "Breathe," she whispered to herself. The door flung across the room with a loud bang, and 2 stocky Marines rushed in, guns blazing. Never catching Layla pressed on the wall. She lifted her SMG and aimed it towards the Marine closest to her and drilled the back of his head and neck. The other Marine spun and began spraying fire, but Layla dove into a roll behind a heavy table. She could hear the Marine reloading as he'd spent a full clip trying to chase her down. Layla popped up from behind the table and unloaded into her opponent's chest, then sprinted immediately towards the doorway. She strafed from around the corner but saw no one approach. She heard a clang and saw a single grenade be hurled into her apartment. She ran towards the falling grenade and leapt, scissor-kicking it back out of the doorway. Layla heard the screams of several soldiers muffled by their helmets before the pop of the explosion. She landed kneeling and reloaded her SMG. The hallway was a splatter of blood and intestines, a decoration to what was once a bland wall. Weapon up and eyes front, she worked her way towards the rear exit, checking every corner and making sure her footing was stable. It slowly became clear to her, however, as she reached the exit, that she had killed a sweeper team. Before she had turned away from the gruesome scene she had been forced to create, Layla counted 5 bodies, 2 in her room, 3 in the hall. That meant her building would be swarming with Morrison's men if they didn't report in. She opened the exit and followed a back alley towards the northern side of the building, hiding behind several dumpsters. Across the street she could see more Marines, some homeless people, and what she thought was a member of her scab team. Layla was forced to watch as the Marines slaughtered them with their assault rifles and beat several of the others to death instead. She looked away from the brutal punishment. With that many Marines, there was little she could do on her own. Layla could feel cold tears running down her warm face and curled up next to the dumpster for what felt like hours. The sun had set, and the cooling night had just started to settle in. Layla no longer heard the screams of the defenseless. No more gunfire, no more explosions. Not even her own voice begging for an end to the violence as she did 13 years ago. Survival was paramount, but torn jeans, sneakers, and a thermal shirt would not sustain her throughout the night. Whether Morrison soldiers were on the street or not, she knew the main road was going to be her only way to get to another shelter. Most of the alleys that weren't boarded up were caved in from explosions, and she wasn't about to go back to her hideout. Layla looked down at her locket and stared at her mother and father's faces. They both smiled back at her. No matter what was going on, she couldn't help but smile back. She clasped the locket back together in her hands. From behind the dumpster, she looked out at the street and surveyed her surroundings. She counted 6 Marines and noticed their varying armaments. 2 carried standard-issue carbines. The other 3 carried shotguns. Layla was familiar with those. She'd seen them in use not too long ago. One shot and the spread took down 2 men running in different directions. If Layla was sure of anything, it was that John Morrison believed in scorched earth and collateral damage. The final Marine, whom she assumed to be the ranking soldier, stood proud with a grenade launcher held up in the air with one arm. She took a quick breath and sprang forward towards the soldier with the launcher. There was no cover and several meters of space between the two, and 5 at-the-ready soldiers. Layla lifted her SMG and clipped the nearest shotgun Marine, then dove into the air and clipped another trooper before hitting the ground rolling. The furthest trooper missed every shot behind her agility. As Layla came up, she let off a few more shots, felling the farthest before colliding with the grenade launcher Marine. She dropped her gun before coming into contact and wrapped the man's head around her arms, but let her legs sweep around him. She felt his head jerk too far right, and then a pop. Layla let him go and landed on her feet as her mark hit the ground. The assault rifle-wielding Marines had not yet had a chance to aim, being so absorbed in the engagement in front of them. Layla looked up from her kneeling position and watched as the Marines lifted their weapons. "This is it," she said to herself, eyeing the mutilated bodies of the homeless and infirm. She could smell murder in the air, and the warmth of their hatred piercing through the night's chills. The laser sights on their weapons dotted her head and chest. Then a scream. It was not hers. She looked up to face her imminent fate, but instead saw a woman no taller than her rush the Marines. While they turned and attempted to fire, Layla took the chance to roll behind a nearby stoop. The new woman's head was shaved, and she was either covered in filth and debris or her skin was naturally grayish-brown. It took Layla a few moments to notice that the woman's hands were glowing with a faint red. The Marines, still attempting to get a shot off, were too late. The crazed woman was already in close. She threw her right palm open-handed at the chest of the first Marine, then spun right, shifting all her weight into her left hand and slammed it into the chest of the other Marine. The first fell on his ass. The second flew backwards, legs and arms in front of him, and subsequently exploded. "Stickers," Layla said to herself. Layla had seen them before. She knew they worked much like grenades, but they looked like a child's sticky ball. Inside, compressed liquid would explode after 4 seconds on hard impact. Remote trigger, or a bullet. Layla watched as the woman jumped towards the first Marine, delivering a boot to his face and sending him back. She kneeled and grabbed a knife from the side of her boot, and with precision threw it down hard on the red spot on the Marine. The explosion rained blood around them, and all Layla could think about was the volatile creativity. Layla stood from the stoop and watched the woman turn her head towards her. She rushed her. Layla immediately assumed a defensive stance, but the woman stopped short of her by several feet and then spoke. "Evening," she said in a thick Hispanic accent. "No time for discussion. You can call me Remy. Don't need your name right now." She extended her hand, and when Layla grasped it, the other woman took off with her, running in tow. "Wait!" Layla protested as she freed her wrist. "You might have saved me, but I have no idea who you are. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's going on." The hairless woman looked dumbfounded. Layla realized she must have spoken too quickly, and she'd forgotten about her own accent. As she went to speak again, the woman held her hand up. "Too late," she said slowly, pointing towards the 3 Marines that had their rifles aimed. Layla spun around. Now both women were unarmed, and she was back in the same position as before. "I'm out of miracles today. I sure as hell hope you have one," Layla said, standing in defiance as the Marines moved closer. "More than you know," she said, smirking. "Alex! Elias!" she yelled, cupping her hands around her mouth. The Marines looked confused, but did not falter. "Get on the ground," a soldier yelled out. Layla did not move, but her new friend laughed. Beyond the Marines, she could make out 2 figures. One wore a dark coat, while the other was in an old-world t-shirt. They were rushing the 3 Marines. As they drew closer, she could see that the man in the coat was tall, maybe around 6 feet, and had short black hair. The other was shorter, with brown hair buzzed short, and only slightly taller than she was. The coated man drew a pistol from his side and tagged the Marine in the middle. When the other 2 Marines understood what was going on, they turned to face their new attackers. The tall man delivered a kick to the gut of another Marine and fired a round into the top of his head. The shorter man had charged into the last Marine at the same time, knocking them both to the ground and dislodging the rifle from the Marine's hands. He pried the helmet off his foe and began throwing fists with what seemed like limitless energy. No remorse, no pity, just fist after hammering fist into the Marine's face. Layla couldn't help but wonder who these people were. She watched the brown-haired man continue his strikes, all the while maintaining a calm demeanor. When he was finally done, he stood above his fallen opponent, crimson droplets falling from his gloves. He pulled them off and threw them atop the dead Marine. He turned his head towards her before walking over. Fear was the furthest thing from her mind now. As he approached, Layla took in his every characteristic. From a distance, she had been correct. He was just a little bit taller than her. There were multiple scars on his neck and hands, but his face carried more freckles than old wounds. There was one feature, however, that could not draw her to look away. His eyes. They were brown, but not like coffee or a burnt-out tree. They seemed to glimmer in the failing city lights that still barely operated. He stood before her and extended his hand. "I'm Alex. We saw Marines moving about this area and snuck around to see what they were so interested in. There were more inside that are dead now. They'll come looking for their friends soon," Layla replied. "Not likely. Before we found you, we hit a jeep around the corner. Looks like these were the reinforcements," Alex said. "You stole a Morrison jeep?" she asked. "Wouldn't be the first," the taller man said, picking over ammo from the bodies of the Marines. Layla extended her own hand as she stared down at his. He had the decency to wipe his hands clean of the blood, but it struck her as odd that they were soft. "Layla Lansfield, is this your, scav team?" "Scav team?" Alex asked, looking puzzled. "No, not quite. We've been out here for years, just trying to survive. Like I said, we saw the Marines, so we decided to do a little recon, maybe pick up some ammo and help a few survivors." "Are you the only one left from that building?" Alex gestured towards the apartment Layla had run from earlier. "As far as I know, I'm the only one who got out alive. There was already a sweeper team inside when I woke up. I just tried to get out as fast as I could," she replied. "If you didn't see anybody come out, chances are they're dead now," the taller man stated, moving over to the 2. "That's Elias, and you and Remy are already acquainted? We've got 2 others back with the jeep. I didn't think we'd find another Blood Boil survivor out here," he said, letting his voice trail. Layla realized she had not yet let go of his hand, and of course he was not quick to withdraw either. "You're more than welcome to come with us. Can't be any worse than roughing it out here alone," he said as he let loose his grip. "I've never really had a home out here, but you all saved my life. I'd be happy to tag along with your..." She couldn't think of a name. "Family," Remy said. Layla's eyes opened. The smell of spring soap was still heavy, and the very same soft hand that had been extended to her as trust that day was again closed around her hand and fingers. She smiled to herself. That day had changed the course of her life. She pulled Alex's hand close to kiss it again, and closed her eyes to drift back away in his arms.